Trump is in a lot of trouble. While the markets have moved to a toss-up, it's self-evident that the momentum horrendously against Trump. I think he was dependent on a horrible opponent in the form of Joe Biden. From a trading perspective, I think Harris is trading cheap.
All you timeless children with your predictions and flashbacks, trying to get ahead. What makes you think I can see you? What makes you think I believe you? Dreams, psychopath. Have you heard me lately? You stepping up wailing, shot from the past. All the dreams were flying, all the thoughts were dying. Heard from the past.
Is to check out the odds of who will be the 2024 presidential election winner. And when we look to these charts, something has happened today that has not happened since the presidential debate on June 27th. The flippening has occurred. Kamala Harris is now the betting market favorite to win the presidency in 2024. That obviously wasn't the case just a few weeks ago. A few weeks ago, Trump was looking at his odds peaking near 66 cents. Incidentally enough, the day that Trump's odds peak is the day that financial markets, stock markets in the United States peak. Perhaps, Dylan, as these Trump odds have come back in, financial markets have been pricing out the possibility that you'll get a Republican trifecta and an extension of those 2017 tax cuts. After all, won't companies like tax cuts? Nevertheless, here, this market is now effectively a toss-up. It's such a toss-up, and not just from the betting market perspective, that Nate Silver of 538 fame, who, of course, built the prediction models that ultimately pointed to Obama winning in 2008, 2012. He, as a pollster, despite the flack he receives, probably deserves more credit for giving Trump the highest odds of winning in 2016. Nevertheless, here we are in 2024, and his model as of this morning says that this race is officially a toss-up. The contours of the race have changed to such a degree that it looks like that Pennsylvania could be starting to shift back to the Democrats, and of course, that Wisconsin could as well. While Arizona and Georgia are still very much in Trump's column, the path to victory for either candidate has become a lot more cloudy. This is a real race again, Dylan, and that means the long-dated contract here for who will win the presidential election is probably going to gain some viability as a more tradable asset in the near term. Dylan.
Yeah, I mean, I would even argue that Trump is in a lot of trouble. It's that Biden was a perfect opponent for Trump, because as long as Biden was Trump's opponent, the conversation was always about Biden and never about Trump. Now that Harris is the opponent, the conversation becomes about Trump, and Harris is so well positioned to exploit the profound frustration around the abortion issue, especially, but also the age issue, and also some of the rhetorical issues as it relates to both women and minorities. You said this on Overtime a couple of days ago, Chris, where 5 out of 6 voters pre-Harris were double haters. They hated Biden and they hated Trump. And that now it's gone to 5 out of 8 are double haters, and all of the non-double haters are Harris voters, not Trump voters. But while the markets have moved to a toss-up, it's self-evident that the momentum horrendously against Trump. I think Trump is in a lot of trouble right now, and that the market is moving so quickly that it's not ready to write him off by any means. But I don't believe Trump is well positioned to serve as a front runner. I think he was dependent on a horrible opponent in the form of Joe Biden. I think he was dependent on everybody ignoring what the abortion law, legal changes around abortion the last few years in this country. And he's dependent on everybody ignoring basically everything he says and does, and just focusing on a demented old man. And now that people are focused on what Trump says and does, and they're focused on abortion, I believe from a trading perspective, I think Harris is trading cheap. And I know that they'll say, well, listen, you need to make it a referendum on Harris. And if you take a closer look at Harris, it's easy to be horrified. She couldn't win a single delegate. So there's all sorts of issues with her as a candidate relative to the issues with Trump. But they're just with Trump as a candidate, the Harris issues are basically irrelevant. And I think it's going to be very difficult for the Trump campaign to take the attention off of them that they now have. And it only makes it worse that Trump is an atrocious front runner, as evidenced by his performance this week. I think it was yesterday or the day before, just saying idiotic things one after the next. So from a betting perspective, I think Harris actually is trading cheap right now.
Over the past few episodes, we've made the argument that Harris has been trading cheap across a few contracts. Will she be the presidential nominee? Will she even be on the ticket? At the time when we were examining will Kamala Harris be on the Democratic ticket, it was trading around 90 cents. It's now trading up to 97 cents, as it were. And that really is just a function of how Democratic Party politics work and how campaign finance laws work in this country. It's worth noting that when a candidate is swapped out on a ticket, so long as one of the two candidates can remain on the ticket, all the money can stay with that particular campaign finance vehicle. And just given how close we were to the election, it seemed highly probable that Democrats wouldn't skip over a person who is already effectively on the ballot for the past several months, running as Joe Biden's running mate, having received those primary votes moving forward. So I guess the question has been whether or not we would see someone unique come in as a secondary person, a vice presidential candidate who could help tip the scales or generate some positive momentum. But before we get there, let's talk about you feeling that Kamala is undervalued. I think that's actually a case to be made, again, because of the contours of the media coverage here. One thing that is unique in American politics is that polling averages typically bounce for candidates after things like a convention. And God forbid it happens, should they survive, the polling numbers typically bounce after assassination attempts. It was a good fortune, perhaps, that both of those things arrived at the same time for Donald Trump. And I say good that he survived the assassination attempt, of course, because that should be a perfect storm for a bump in polls. Dylan, you and I were talking on Overtime a lot how if Democrats were going to play a Biden transition smart, they would do it right around the RNC to take the steam out of that bubble, to shift the spotlight away from party unity onto the new younger candidate. And that's what they've done. And so since the Republican convention, since the horrible events of July 13th that nearly took former President Donald Trump's life, Trump has not enjoyed a bounce in the polls. Instead, all that attention has gone to Kamala. Earned media is doing work. It's shifting those static snapshots in time of those polls. And now we're heading into the Democratic National Convention. Conventions typically give their candidates a 2-point bump in the polls in the 2 weeks following them. So given the media swing that we're seeing right now, forget these contracts for will Kamala be president? Will she be on the ticket? Will she be the Democratic nominee? Focus on Trump-Harris. Harris has a nice little tailwind right now, and it probably gives an opportunity to ride this higher in the short term. But Dylan, I guess the next question is, if Harris is going to continue to rise here, at what point do you think the betting market would be too confident that Harris would be the president this early on, say before Labor Day? If Harris goes from 50 cents to 70 cents, would you get out of a position there, or would you even think about selling her in the market?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I would say that 70 to 75 cents is fair value in terms of probability. I think that basically it is hers to F up at this point. You know, even though the markets are a toss-up, that it's sort of like it was Trump's to screw up, and he wasn't screwing it up, right? The Biden thing was working. Biden was self-destroying. I mean, the whole Biden situation was the greatest gift to any political opponent that ever could exist, even one as horrible as Donald Trump. But the problem is Donald Trump is now the most horrible presidential candidate in the race. And since we live in a world where the votes constantly are obtained by being the lesser of two, very few people vote for political candidates and haven't for a long time, because we've created a lesser of two evils voting structure with these binary two-party, all the issues. But because it's a lesser of two evils structure, Trump was viewed as the lesser of two evils in a Trump-Biden matchup. In a Harris-Trump matchup, Harris by far is seen as the lesser of two evils, thus your double hater data. I actually think you're in a situation where as long as Harris doesn't do Harris is really going to have to work to screw it up now, basically, is what I'm getting at. So I think it's easy for her contract to trade into the mid-70s. I would say it's not until it gets into the 80s that you start to say, well, hang on a second, this is a little bit too confident. And she's very capable of screwing it up. Remember, she couldn't get a single delegate when she ran for president. Very true. When she speaks, she's so easy not to like. She's incredibly inauthentic. She's got all sorts of horrible policies in her past, beneficial to the big banks during the bailouts. You know, all these sort of, there's a lot of things that she's done that are not attractive, and her presence and personality when she communicates is not engaging and not authentic. However, she's much better than Donald Trump, which is all it requires to win the president of the United States. And so, again, I think there's a lot of room to run in her contract higher. I don't get skeptical of her pricing until it's in the 80s, which that skepticism would be on the fact that you have to preserve the chance that she's going to come out in public and say something horrendous or really stupid, because she has a history of doing that. And there's a reason why there's all the Harris memes from the last 4 years portraying her as the equivalent of Julia Louis-Dreyfus's character in her television show Veep. Because you can
which is fantastic for what it's worth.
You can pull the Veep sound bites where her characters say, "Words are things that come out from my mouth when I move my lips," and then he goes to Harris saying, "Words are things that come out from my mouth when I move my lips," and you wonder if you've lost your mind. But as stupid as all that is, and God help us all, it's stupid. It's not nearly as bad as Donald Trump, and it doesn't. And abortion, in my opinion, should have been a much more central issue in this year's presidential election than it was with Biden in the race. And the emergence of Harris as a candidate moves that to the front. And Trump is terrible on that issue. Trump is a famous philandering playboy of New York City. And so, his relationship with abortion is surely one that exists. I guess I would put it kindly that way. And so his credit, anyway. So I just think that Trump's got big problems, and I think this is Harris's to screw up, and I think that her contract is cheap as a result.
You mentioned her contract is cheap on Predicted. It may be cheaper elsewhere. Perhaps this is an emerging arbitrage opportunity for those opportunistic traders out there. I pulled up the Real Clear Politics betting odds data that aggregates the figures across the various prediction markets. Obviously, Polymarket, if you were a US-based trader, is inaccessible for overseas only. But when we look at these, yes, we have Predicted right now according to this latest betting odds. And why is this pulling up? Here we go. 46-49. Trump 46, Harris 49. But the average across all of the betting venues is Trump 51.4, Harris 43.6. I'm not saying that you could go out there and I'm not saying you could go out there and sell Harris at, say, 49 in Predicted and buy her at 40 in Betfair. But there's clearly a discrepancy here in these markets right now, and they haven't been resolved in the short term. So today, Predicted is the first market that actually shows the flippening happening. The other markets have not yet. Is Predicted wrong, and is it going to realign with what we've seen elsewhere? Or is everything else waiting to catch up because they're not as deep and as liquid of betting pools? That's a question that you, the viewer, has to answer.
Isn't it a question of liquidity? I mean, I just don't know how deep how real are those other prices when you look at volume?
And that's why people should do the investigation themselves, because some of these markets, you have trades that are a penny wide, and there are other markets where the trades are 4 pennies wide. And so if you're making that kind of trade and you could arb out 4 pennies, well, you can't do it anymore because the bid ask is too far apart. So it's not that every single betting market may be appropriate, but if we look to the political market odds aggregated, there are clear discrepancies there right now, which may be exploitable for sophisticated enough traders. One that was not there last week, which we pointed out, just to disabuse anyone of the notion that these are an arbitrage opportunity within the market, was whether or not Harris would be the 47th president versus who would win the presidency. There is that technical outcome whereby if Joe Biden were to resign or pass away before the end of his term, Harris would then be sworn in as the 47th president of the United States, but she could still lose the 2024 election. So while Harris becomes the 47th president, goes up, Democrats may not win the seat. Obviously, this window is going to close as we get closer to Election Day. But it's not necessarily a straightforward arb opportunity the way that maybe exploiting differences in contract prices across different venues may be. And that's something that people in finance do all the time, Dylan. I'm remembering a documentary with Paul Tudor Jones called The Trader, where they show him in his home where he's literally on the phone with people in London and people on the phone with people on the phone in Tokyo, and he's getting 2 different quotes for dollar-yen rates, and he's buying one and selling the other right on the spot just to capture the spread. So if you're quick enough and you're sophisticated enough, you should examine this as a potential opportunity, in my opinion. I certainly know that I will be here moving forward, Dylan. But let's talk about the more near-term contract expiration. In recent days, trial balloons have been floated that Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro will be the vice presidential nominee on the Democratic ticket. The writing has been on the wall for a number of reasons. He, of course, comes from a swing state. Him, Tim Walz, Mark Kelly were my big three that I thought would be the VP pick at the end of the day. Shapiro seems to be coming ahead. Shapiro himself offers not just competency in the executive role, but he has huge approval ratings in perhaps one of the 6 most important states and maybe the most important state in the union for this election. Why do we feel that Shapiro's rising in the market? Well, news a few days ago told us that he would be canceling, and it was confirmed today, canceling fundraisers out in the Hamptons. He has different political events on his calendar now. Why on earth would he be canceling those events, Dylan, for his re-election for governor, unless something more important was going on? It was also announced that the Kamala Harris campaign would be making its first stop with its vice presidential nominee on Tuesday in the city of brotherly love. Philadelphia, of course, is in Pennsylvania, Dylan. So Shapiro's been on fire here the past few sessions. When we look to this market, Josh Shapiro has exploded since the first stop in Philadelphia announcement here on July 29th. Shapiro was trading at 35 cents then. He's up to 68 cents in this market. Dylan, with your read on the situation, first off, is this the right pick for the Democrats? If it's not, would you be fading this move? Is there a candidate that you think is undervalued here? Or is this kind of like a 3 or 4 day to expiration options contract, right? If she's rallying on Tuesday, then this is going to be settled quickly, which means this could move very, very rapidly over the next 72 to
I think Shapiro
hours.
basically is a sure thing at this point.
I find the most interesting one here on the board right now is Andy Beshear. No idea why he would be rated at 18 cents. He has not been in any of the media reports. He's a red state governor who perhaps is the only Democrat who could win in Kentucky at the governor level. It's kind of like Joe Manchin in West Virginia. How many other Democrats can win in West Virginia? And so you don't really have an incentive to primary him. I don't know if it's going to be Shapiro still. There's a lot of consternation, but the trial balloons are going out. If there was one confident pick I had on this board, it would be to short Andy Beshear right now. I don't know if I'd want to buy Shapiro at 70 cents, but I think Beshear is far too high in the short term.
And I also think the other sort of outlier, the long shot is Mark Kelly at 11 cents.
Mark Kelly offers a compelling package, right? He's a pro 2A, pro border control Democrat, national hero, astronaut, Navy combat vet in Arizona. Wife, the survivor of political violence, which perhaps, given recent events, negates advantages elsewhere for another candidate. And it could help Democrats retain the Senate seat versus Kari Lake. If there is a special election there, the Democratic governor of Arizona, Katie Hobbs, could appoint the Democrat to fill the seat for the next 2 years. So it makes a good deal of sense, but he's only trading at 11 cents right now. Maybe this is an East Coast media bias thing, Dylan. But I don't know if I'd be buying Shapiro. I think for an 11 cents, buying Kelly, shorting Beshear, there's enough there right now where even if it is Shapiro, you can still squeeze 7 cents out of that position, right? Because if you're short at 18, it goes to 0.
I agree with you. I like what you're saying.
Plus 11 there, right? You lose 11 cents there. Your net is plus 7. So playing the VP contract the next few sessions, to me, I wouldn't be playing Shapiro, short Beshear, long Kelly. It's a way to go about looking into these odds. Dylan, VP picks aren't usually that important nationally. Trump had a wide-ranging conversation yesterday with the conference in Chicago for a black journalist. One thing that he astutely pointed out is that vice presidential picks typically don't matter a lot. And I think this is in reference to some of the concern around J.D. Vance. And for 49 out of 50 states, that's true. VP picks rarely, if any, have any effect. But in their home state, VP picks are worth about 2 percentage points on the ticket. So if you add a Shapiro, add 2% to where you see Harris-Trump in Pennsylvania. If you add Kelly, add 2% to where you see Harris-Trump in Arizona. That is part of the strategy, of course.
I mean, the other thing that I will say, and this goes to more, the other thing that I'll say that goes more to why Trump has issues is the VP can't help you win. I agree with what Trump said yesterday, but the VP can help you lose.
Yes. As
we saw with Ross Perot years ago when he picked a terrible vice presidential candidate, as we saw with George Bush Sr. with Dan Quayle, who did not help George Bush Sr. get reelected. And so I think that because Trump is already weak and because he's picked a VP who's likely to help him lose, J.D. Vance is a liability. A vice presidential candidate is only an asset in their home state, as you said very clearly. But a bad vice presidential candidate is a national liability, and that's what Trump has. And that's what Harris needs to avoid.
Harris needs to avoid that. A pick that could perhaps unify the party would go a very long way. I've seen a lot of people say they have concern about Shapiro, given his stance on Israel. It's something that I've articulated as well, that I'm hearing from people on the left saying if Shapiro's the guy, I'm not going to be happy. I wish it was a Tim Walz, if it was Mark Kelly even, but even they have their reservations over Kelly. Look, no one's going to be happy at the end of the day. There's always going to be some group of people who don't like something that happens. But either way, it looks like this is the contract that will be resolved. Democratic vice presidential nominee, that should be this Tuesday. Granted, the news are probably going to leak beforehand, right? I would point out here, for those that are thinking about the Shapiro trade, maybe you don't want to buy it at 71 cents. Maybe you do want to buy it at 71 cents. There was a reporter on the ground who came out of a meeting with various unions in Philadelphia who tweeted in the last day that they have been told to be ready to appear for an event with Governor Shapiro next Tuesday as well. Whether or not that's true is another story, but the murmurings and the little flares, smoke signals that typically go up behind these kinds of announcements, they are starting to appear left and right and left and right.